Okay, the story begins here at Ardkeen Corner. This is where my mother, Sarah Ellen Torney, lived, known as Sally, with her mum and sister. And way back in 1944, at the coming to the end, I presume, of the war, her and her sister were leaving here to walk up the road to Ballygalget Chapel to what I presume was devotions, because it was a Sunday evening, so had it have been Mass, I presume it would have been earlier in the morning. But they left here and on the way up the road picked up their cousins Johnny and the Dorian family, who lived a little bit further up the road, and made their way up towards Ballygalget, over through Lochdew and up the Broomhill, and then follow up the Betty Roger. And on their way, when they got to a roundabout what was known colloquially as Teeny Gordon's, which is now Michael Breen's, they were stopped by, I presume, the local police force, or maybe somebody from the RAF, because there had been an aircraft had come down, disintegrated in the air after its tail fin had fallen off, and the plane had then crashed, or not crashed, but had disintegrated and fallen to the ground in Ballygalget Cemetery, which was their destination. So they were stopped there and turned back, and I can only imagine the amount of commotion and talk that would have been on among them about being stopped and coming home and telling their parents and whatever else about this plane having crashed. And unfortunately, where 5 people lost their lives, 5 of the airmen who were on board lost their lives as a result of the accident. And you know, the story, I presume at that time, was widely told or retold, but it was never ever something in my lifetime that was ever told to us, really, other than Mummy saying that they were making their way up to the chapel that night. And it was the night that Frank Dorian, her cousin, who would have been Johnny's brother, or he is Johnny's brother, was born. So I presume that had some resonance with them then, that they kept retelling it for that reason. But certainly, as somebody growing up, it was never ever something that was told widely to me, and it was really never a story I knew, other than what Johnny then told us in later years about how this aircraft had crashed and multiple people had lost their lives. But certainly, I presume maybe it was because of the war. People just didn't talk about the war, certainly didn't talk about the tragedy of the war widely, and therefore maybe the older generation probably told Mummy and them, oh, don't be talking about that because people died and it's not right, and that type of thing. But unfortunately, there was never any type of memorial left in Ballygalget to those people. And you know, maybe this is now something, I know Seamus Dorian knows the story widely through Johnny, and hopefully that the people will be remembered, and maybe something come of retelling the story at this point. And because unfortunately a lot of the people who did know the story firsthand are no longer with us, including Mummy and Johnny. So maybe hopefully in the fullness of time we will come to have some sort of permanent memorial to the pilots or the crew members, the sergeants who lost their lives,
or
during
their family members.
To have some there. But definitely, I think it's certainly an event in the history of the townland of Ballygalget and the wider area around it, and it should be something that's marked. Although from what I can gather, there are quite a few plane crashes or fatalities around that time, but maybe that was just aviation and where they were at that point in time.
Well, here we are in Ballygalget Graveyard. It's the 20th of April 2022. I'm here with Anna and Agnes and the lovely Ursula, and we've met at this gravestone here because it belongs to Captain Smith. And this is when I was first alerted or became aware of the aircraft crash in Ballygalget. There was a local historian, Jim Blaney, had called to see Daddy and wanted to know where the headstone had gone. It was in the shape of a ship's wheel. And Daddy said to him, no, it's not the ship's wheel anymore, it was replaced after the aeroplane hit it. And then I was beginning to wonder what aeroplane. So I did a wee bit of research into that. There was an aeroplane crash here.
And who replaced the headstone, Jim?
The RAF sent a team. I take it there was more than just this headstone wiped out. There's a few concrete ones around us here, so probably they were taken out by the aeroplane and they were replaced by the RAF workers that came to tidy everything up.
So Seamus, this was the Captain Smith and his headstone was replaced, but did the plane totally crash here, or was it? Did it come down?
No, I think it disintegrated above us somewhere, and it destroyed a few headstones, but it didn't actually land in the graveyard. Some of the headstones dated well before that. So wherever it was coming from, it landed, bits of it
Bits
landed.
and pieces.
Yeah.
Thankfully, maybe that, you know.
Well, there was 5 men killed on it.
Oh my goodness.
So
how did that happen?
well, once Daddy had told me about the airplane crash, I emailed the RAF and I got a report from them, which I've since misplaced. But there was a lot of things redacted in it.
Oh, right,
But basically what happened was the aeroplane that broke up above us was coming from Bishop's Court, and it was meeting one from a few miles down the road from Ballygalget Airdrome.
Yeah.
And they met somewhere above us. The one from Ballygalget then was pulling a big target, like a windsock behind it. They were to practice shooting at it or whatever. I don't really know. But the air accident then said that it headed out over towards Slans.
Right.
I think they went out there quite often to do the practice that they were doing. But when they looked back, there was no sign of the other one. It was an Anson. And the report was inconclusive, but they said that the tail broke off due to inexperience. They were only young fellas, they were in their 20s. So it broke up above us, and they said there was 3 witnesses locally. I know Daddy always said that one of the Hineses was bringing cows in from the Loch Marns just behind us here.
Right, okay.
And he got frightened by what he saw.
Yeah,
so it was a couple of days before he actually came forward to say that he had seen it.
Actually,
so they had some eyewitness reports, but it was fairly inconclusive as to what happened. Turns out the plane was made from canvas and plywood, so it wasn't the strongest thing. It looked the part, but broke up and 5 men lost their lives.
And probably even if it was made of canvas, if it wasn't the sturdiest thing, that if it broke up it wouldn't have done that much damage on the ground really, other than to lives.
No, I think there was just a bit of debris scattered over. They sent a team of men. They lived up at Uncle Jared's there. It was Grandad's at the time. They slept in his loft and they spent about a week tidying things up and replacing 1 or 2 headstones that had been broken. And then Jared was the bits of the aeroplane were left over at his yard. He was only a very young fella at the time.
Well, Ivan, I don't remember a lot about it, as I was very young at the time, but I heard my father saying about there was a part of the undercarriage was lying beside the sheep dipper, and that's about all that I can really tell you. I know there was, and they stayed on the loft here for a few days while they were tidying up the place.
But it's funny how little it was talked about.
Yeah.
You know, because you would have thought something like that would have been...
Wasn't mentioned.
No.
Never.
It wasn't
Even, you
mentioned.
know,
Never heard about
even
it.
to today, the very little talk is about
No.
it, considering that there obviously are
Yeah.
historical recounts of it, but not...
And
It's never been talked about
No,
here.
really.
I think that it happened here. That's why I wanted to sort of investigate it more. And then I found out later on, I could tell you about real coincidence. It happened on the day Uncle Frank
Dorham was born. I remember
the
your
20th
daddy
of
saying
August,
that. Johnny,
1944.
Right.
So that's why I was sort of, I had a wee inkling of chasing it up because of
It would be nice if
the
there was
family.
a permanent memorial.
Yeah, it would be lovely.
It
To
would
those
be.
people, you know,
Yeah.
who obviously...
well, even just
Lost
to put
their
the story
lives.
up
Totally.
would be nice. Yeah.
And to remember them, because...
Yeah. Because I never remembered a primary school or anything ever been talked about.
No, we were looking out at it.
Yeah.
But maybe people too were frightened, I suppose.
Yeah.
A plane crash would be quite a traumatic thing, you know, and especially if a number of people died, it was probably traumatic,
Yeah.
but it would still be nice to remember them,
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
you know, that story at the very least.
Totally.
Because unfortunately the likes of Johnny and Mummy and people who maybe actually remembered it in person,
Yeah, are gone.
Well, they weren't very old. They were
No.
only about 7. They were on their way. There was
Yeah.
devotions or something on that night,
Yeah.
so they were on their
Yeah.
way up
yeah.
to the chapel, and they were stopped down at about Michael Breen's there. They weren't allowed up the road.
Taken further.
And Daddy said it was about a week before they were allowed up the road again.
Yeah.
Was anybody at school at that time? Because the school was just, the old school was just behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you would imagine there was a fair bit of talk about it at the time and drama, and you know, probably people were worried that it never actually, the story was never told really after that.
Maybe they didn't talk among the children about it with so many people dying.
And I
Yeah.
suppose the war,
Frightened
maybe
them.
people who were in the war just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So, Seamus, you heard the story from Johnny, but then what was the other bit you said?
Well, because there was no talk about it, I emailed the RAF, and it took quite a while, but they sent me a report back, and it was all the names were redacted. But what was very interesting for me is
people who died.
Yeah, but one of the people, there was one of the men who died was buried in Solihull, I think, in
Right.
or Soho in London. But that didn't stick in my mind. I caught my eye on the Drumstern, and that's where my wife Bridget's from.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's just a wee place like this in the middle of nowhere up in Derry, and that's what really got me thinking about it. So I just thought there was the connection for me was Uncle Frank was born that day, Daddy was stopped, he was going to do the altar, your mummy was there with them on the way up, and then having this connection with Drumstern, you know, it really.
All those years later, she was,
Yeah. Well, I was married in the chapel just up the road from where this fellow was. I didn't know it at the time, but where he is now buried.
Yeah. And how did you find out then who he was if it was redacted?
My father-in-law, God rest him, he was alive at the time, and he was, you know, he was with us, clear as a bell. And I asked him, did he ever hear of anybody? He was 90, so I knew he was alive at the time, and that's the area where he was from. He said that he'd been gathering potatoes on Black's farm when word came through that the eldest son had been killed. They didn't know at that point it was him. And then, but because it's so far away, it was maybe about 3 or 4 weeks later we were down again, and he said that he had thought about it more. He would have been 13 at the time, so he said they were coming back to the yard a week after they'd been told, and he said there was his bike and a suitcase sitting against the steps up into the loft, and that was his memory of it. He didn't know the fella at all. He was 22 when he was killed, so but he came back to the yard one Saturday in the bike, and the suitcase were sitting.
And they had been brought back from the service
he's buried in Drumstern, and I visited his grave.
Oh God.
And it's just a wee country graveyard, no bigger, no smaller than Ballygalget. Aye. Just
amazing.
A lot of coincidence.
Yeah, very sad.
Because it's funny how you ask him, you know, thank you.
Thanks. Right.
Now, the local parish priest for today at Ballygalget is Father McGrady. And I called in with him down in Portaferry at the parochial house, and I was chatting to him about this incident. And I said, is there any way that you could uncover any information, or is there any information on it? So what he did was he said, Ivan, I'll check the Chronicon diary, which is the parish church diary, and anything of significance is noted in that. And there was an entry in it for the 20th of August 1944. And I'm just going to have a little excerpt or two. I'm just going to read it to you here. It says, and the serving priest at that point in time was Father J.J. Green, and indeed he's buried in the graveyard here to the best of my knowledge. It says in his entry that 2 tanks of petrol fell a few yards to the south side of the church, which is into the Tullymally side. And one of these tanks bounced on the ground and rebounded up like a bouncing bomb. This was the fuel tank out of the plane, one of them, and it burst open and sprayed fuel for 20 yards all around. It didn't go on fire, miraculously, but it bounced over the road. Now that is going to be into where Oliver's Close development is there at the moment. So that was one point he made. The second thing he noted was that there were 4 tombstones which were destroyed with parts of debris falling from the plane into the graveyard and upsetting and wrecking the stones, and a fifth was slightly damaged. And a portion of the wreck was found in the field to the south side of the chapel. So that, indeed, again, is most likely Oliver's Close or the next field just down behind it or behind it. But in the Air Ministry report, it says the wreckage from the plane was spread over around 400 yards, so that would cover us in a circle right round the chapel building here. Now, I was wondering how to finish off this sad day at Ballygalget story, and we're in this lovely chapel, and I thought, what more fitting way than to close it down with a hymn, "The day thou gavest, Lord, it has ended."